Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good, man. Good topic today. I think it's a very relevant topic and something that'll lead us into the summer. We're gonna talk about the role of the parent, and we're going to talk about it from two different angles. One, in the recruiting process, what the role of the parent should be, and then two, looking a little bit farther ahead and understanding the role of the parent from the perspective of a current or prospect that is moving on to a college campus and what that looks like. And I think there's been some stuff going around social media, and I think it's important to kind of touch on this topic and give some information out, not only to the parents themselves, but also the players, because I do think that there's some interaction here that's important that we'll certainly get into. So I want to start it off with a quote from the back-to-back national championship men's basketball team at UConn, Mr. Danny Hurley. Recently, probably seen some stuff going around Instagram or Twitter with him and Dawn Staley, who are obviously the absolute top of the food chain when it comes to coaches in the country right now. Both national champions in basketball this past year. Dawn Staley with South Carolina. But an interesting quote from Danny Hurley, which I think will kick this off to us, is, are parents going to hold their kids accountable? Have an expectation that when something goes wrong, that it's not the coach's fault, that their sons or daughters got to work harder. He's got to do more. He's got to earn his role. And I think it's such a relevant topic in today's world where there's a lot of instant gratification that goes on, whether it's through social media with likes or having easy success as you go through your high school process if you're a really talented player. But the reality of college baseball or college athletics in general is that you need to be able to earn your spot. And I think there's a lot of blame that gets shifted to coaches when things don't go right for kids. And some of it may be justified, but I just thought it was really interesting that the best basketball program in the country right now, one of the topics that he has covered in depth in recent weeks is the role of the parent and how he evaluates how players interact with them, but then also putting information out there for parents to think about in terms of how they handle their kids and making sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain with making sure that their kids are accountable and making sure that their kids are in a place where they understand that they need to compete for something. So I'm gonna open it up with that, and we'll see where this conversation takes us.
Sure. I think one of the harder things for parents to grasp when their son or daughter goes to college is that you're not necessarily going to be privy to a lot of the conversations that you may have had at the AAU or youth level. We've talked about this quite a bit, and it will always hold true that this is a business. And when I was coaching, when we would have recruits on campus and families, and they'd come and sit in my office, like it would always come up at some point in time, like, I'm going to hold your son to account. There's certain standards that we have in this program, and if we don't meet them, these are the consequences. But this is what we do. And, from a health and well-being standpoint, I will always answer those phone calls and emails and be glad to talk to you for as long as you need me to when it comes to your son's health and well-being. But if it comes to playing time and how he practices and anything in regards to baseball, like, that conversation will not be had with anybody that is a parent. Because your son is an adult when he's like, yes, we call them adults. Are they adults? Like, no, they're 18 years old and learning to become one. But that's part of the process of becoming an adult and a college baseball player and growing up is understanding what your output is going to be getting you and what you need to do in order to get more burn and to get on the field and to find success and have those conversations that might be tough. And I can promise you that the vast majority of programs in the country, you're going to have a really good idea of where you fit in from a playing standpoint. the kids know, and if you ask them, they have a really good idea of where they fit in and what they need to do to get better. And, do you have some kids that might struggle with that? Yeah, absolutely. They like you're going to, and that's fine. But I think a lot of times, parents kind of get caught up in, you've done all of this stuff your whole life, from paying for lessons and AAU baseball and youth baseball and everything. Like there's a substantial investment on that end, that when they get to college and, you are paying tuition and stuff, you want to be able to kind of have a say, and that's not going to happen. And for some people, that's super tough to be able to kind of swallow and move on from. And I think the other side of it is, this is, again, a business that we talk about quite frequently, but these are guys' careers, and we talked about this earlier today, long before we started recruiting. And I was thinking about it when I was working out. Like, I think sometimes that you have adults who are older than the coaches, and they feel as though because they're older, they have more experience and they know more. Like, and I've used this analogy a lot. Like, you don't watch a YouTube video and then call a plumber and tell him how to do his job when he's, fixing your toilet or sink or something, but I think a lot of times because baseball is easily accessible and the amount of information that's out there, there's a lot of things where people can kind of automatically start to assume that they know a lot more. And there's so much that goes into this game as just anything from a coaching standpoint, knowing the game and understanding it and how to coach, and what the little nuances and the game within the game that you continually get into, that watching a handful of Yankees games and seeing some youth games do not give you that perspective. And I think that if you played high school baseball and then you watch a couple of Yankee games, like, you might have an opinion on some stuff, but it's likely not right. And that's okay. But I think, like, the self-realization of saying, like, okay, like, I don't know everything there is to know about baseball. I'm going to trust that the coaches actually have the best interests of my son at heart, and they're going to put him in the best position to be able to find success, which 98% of coaches do. Like, I'll leave some margin for error there, but like the vast majority of college coaches like want the best for every single kid in their program. So they're going to put them in the best position that they possibly can to find success. But, this is big boy stuff. And I think sometimes like the role of the parent then has to shift to, being supportive once you get to college, of, being able to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing on and off the field. And, what type of effort are you putting out to, do you need to go have a conversation with coach about what you need to do more of, and all of those things versus, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. You should be playing every day. I've seen these kids play before. Like, you haven't seen enough to be able to make that decision. So, I think that there's a lot, and we can probably unpack a lot of what I just said as we go. But that's always kind of been my thought process and my approach of when when families would come in and we'd have this conversation. A lot of it just kind of stemmed from like, this is my career. I've been doing this for 16 years at this point in time. Like, I have a really good idea of what I'm doing. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I have a really good idea. And I know more than you. And that's not, I don't mean to say that as like, I don't mean to come off as cocky or, however, but like, when you do something as your career for 16 years and you do it 24/7, 365, like, you start to get pretty good at it. And, that's where it comes in of like, we know more than most people. I see the game differently than a lot of people. So like, there's a lot more that goes into it. And I think that's where people get jammed up, because it's America's sport, America's pastime. And, you can watch some games. You can watch games from 1 o'clock till whenever. You can listen to Michael Kay break it down and all these other people and think that you know how to coach it. And that's just not true.
Yeah, and it's always a tough conversation to have, because I do think that with most parents, it comes from a good place where they just want the best for their kids. But I think there's a couple things that parents need to step back, and this is more towards the parents who have kids who are going into college or are on campus currently, is you need to be a parent, not a fan. Fans question coaches, fans make assumptions, fans sit on the bench and criticize based on situations that they don't fully understand, that they're not fully privy to. Like, parents got to understand that those coaches are with those kids pretty much 7 days a week, and they're not making decisions in a vacuum. And if your son is playing or not playing, there's a reason for both of those outcomes, right? And college baseball is a lot more complex than high school in that you have platoons, you have much more defined roles. There's a lot more roster flexibility. It's a lot more competitive, right? We've talked about the fine filter that there is, and this doesn't matter whether it's the highest level of Division I or it's the lowest level of Division III, that those coaches have insight into what your kid is doing every day. And if they make a decision one way or another, there's a reason for that. If they're playing, they're probably performing during the week, or they bring something to the table that helps that team win games. If your son is not playing, or more broadly across all sports, if your daughter is not playing, there's probably a reason as to why that's happening. Maybe they're not performing well in practice. Maybe they just happen to be behind somebody who's better than they are at the moment. But I hear it. I hear the chatter at high school games, and I think this is where some of it starts. And not out here giving parent advice, but here's something that I thought about before we started talking about this, is that you hear parents chirp at games. And we're out watching high school games all the time, and you hear parents question, well, I don't know why so-and-so's starting, like he's been bad the last couple of days. One, you're passing judgment on somebody else's kid for no reason, which I have an issue with. But two, it's easy to pick at things that you don't agree with. And you're sitting there questioning a coach, well, why did he bunt in that situation? And why did he do that? But my issue lies in that I think a lot of these conversations carry on to the player, and these conversations get had with the kid. And basically what you're training them to do is always question or always have a built-in excuse as to why things don't happen the way they want to happen. When you get in the car with your kid after the game and things don't go well, if you just reinforce that the coach is wrong and it's the coach's fault, you're basically building them in an excuse where eventually the environment that they get in, if they get a chance to play at the collegiate level, that stuff is not acceptable. And they're going to cop out because their first thing is going to be, well, I'm not playing because coach doesn't know what he's doing. And that's fundamental problem.
I agree. And I think that's where those kids are going to find them, like they get weeded out of college baseball programs very quickly. Because if if everything is just an excuse and it's never your fault, it's everyone else's fault. Like from a coaching standpoint, nobody has time for that. So it's just gonna be like, hey man, like if like this isn't gonna work. So, especially with the new rules that you can just transfer willy-nilly whenever you want now, like, and just jump in the portal. Like this isn't gonna work out here. Like I'm not, and it's not something like it's not something that happens instantly, but it's one of those things that, like, if every time something goes wrong, it's never your fault. It's everyone else's fault. Like, eventually it just gets to the point where it's just like, I'm not doing this anymore. If you can't take any ownership over any of this stuff, like, then we're moving on here. Because it gets exhausting. And there's enough kids out there. This is a big country. There's enough kids out there that will take ownership of that process and not make excuses, or be coached, or have it coached into them where they're like, yeah, you're right. I can do a better job here and move on and move forward. But if it's just going to be constantly like, not my fault, beat it, man. Jump in the portal.
Yeah, coaches don't want to deal with that. And it's not that you don't have room to question coaches, right? Like that's natural. Like I get it. I understand. Like I've been on the other side of it. I've been on this side of the player. I've been on the side of it as a coach. Like, it's not that coaches are immune from criticism, but it's the idea that that's the first place we jump when something doesn't go right, that it's the coach's fault, or the coach doesn't like me, or they're not developing me, or I'm not getting a chance. And I think a lot of that information is false. And I'm going to go back to another quote from, you'll laugh at this because it's a soccer thing, but Robbie Van Persie, who's one of the great strikers of his generation, Dutch guy, is an interesting interview that he has about his son, who's a up and coming talent playing for a specific team in the Netherlands called Feyenoord. But his son got done playing a game and he didn't play. And he got in the car and he was bitching about not playing, and he was bitching about the coach. And Robbie Van Persie, one of the greatest of all time at what he ever did, looked his son in his face. He goes, "You sound like a loser. Like, you need to be asking yourself, what do you need to do? Not what does somebody else need to do for you?" And that if the first place you pivot is the outside for blame, whether it's the coach or the training staff or whatever it is, if that's the first place you pivot, you're missing the things that you have control over. And if you're a parent and you're in this situation with your kid, like, empower them to take control of their process. And if they're not playing, don't make it about the coach. Don't make it about the circumstance. Empower them to continue to work hard, because I guarantee you when they get to college, at some point, something's not going to go their way. And the kids who have been told that they need to work harder and they need to change the way that they're doing things, or they need to adapt to the situation, that kid's going to be successful. The kid whose parents has constantly told them that it's not their fault and that the coach is an idiot and they don't know what they're doing, that kid's going to fall into the same pattern when he gets to college. And it's not going to change when he goes into the portal. It's not going to change until he gets what he wants. And the only way that you're going to get what you want is if you get into a situation where you're head and shoulders better than everybody else. And, those are hard to come by. There's not a lot of freshmen who step on campus and play across college baseball. And the ones who do earn it. They're not in the lineup because of any other reason that they're good enough and that they're going to do something that's going to help that team win. And I just think it's huge for parents that at some point you need to let your kid go and compete. You need to let your kid figure it out. You need to let them fail a little bit, and you need to point them in the direction of hard work and commitment to their craft, and not give them an out all the time, because it's going to serve them well when they get to college. And at some point they're going to come back to you. And if you reinforce that it's the coach's fault, it's just going to go into that vicious cycle again. And they're not going to get the results that they're looking for, because they're not getting told the honest truth, which is, hey man, if there's 20 pitchers on the staff and you haven't thrown it all, there's probably a reason for that. And it's probably not the coach's fault. And those are hard realities. But it's the truth. And I think for the people who listen to us, and if this is your first time ever listening to us, we try to err on the side of authenticity and truth when it comes to this stuff. And it might not always be the squishy, colorful thing that people want to hear, but this is the reality of college sports. Like, college sports isn't like social media where you get instant gratification from likes. Like, the hard work that players put in, like, it's not a coincidence that guys have success and guys find themselves in the lineup. It's usually because those are the kids that work hard. It's usually those are the kids that practice really hard. And if you're not one of those guys right now, you probably need to close the gap.
Nailed it. One of the hardest parts, and it's not just the coaches, right? Like, it's the umpire screwed you on that call, and
Yep.
you were safe on that bang single down the line that they didn't. The umpire called you out, or he took you right out of the at bat. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard those things in my life, and it's like, man, you get 3 strikes for a reason. Like, I also watched you, and you know who it is. It's like, he banged me out on the slider that was 8 feet outside. Like, yeah, man, I watched you take 2 fastballs right down the middle too. Like, probably could have got a swing off there, but we didn't swing. But then we punch out on a slider away that, it's a borderline pitch, but it's 0-2 and he rung you up. Swing the bat before, and we don't have that issue. And then we come back, we throw our helmet, we throw our bat, and it's like, it's not the bat and helmet's fault they didn't swing. It's your fault. And I think that, like, when you had, like, it's all these minor things that have built up over time. Like, I remember being younger, my parents being like, we'd play like a 9:00 game in a tournament and get beaten. They're like, hi, you guys just don't play well in the morning. Like, we were like 13. I'm like, we're teeing it up and competing here. Like, what? Like, that can't be a real thing. But like, you have these things that get built in, and like, for argument's sake, like, my parents are amazing people. They just never really played sports. They didn't really know. But I'm one of the more competitive people out. Like, if I'm going to play you in Scrabble, like, I want to whoop your ass. Like, it's what I want to do. But I think that when you have things, and I do think a part of this is, obviously it falls on the parents. I think it does fall on coaches some, but I think there's a specialization aspect of this too, where if you only play baseball, and you're not competing in anything else, it's hard to come, you have to kind of face the reality at some point in time. You can get away with a lot of things, go wrestle. Tell me when you lose, tell me whose fault that was.
Probably the referee's, coach.
It's not, because it's you.
He didn't know how to count points.
It's you against the other dude. So if you lose, you lost. And I think that's, I've learned a little bit more about the lacrosse world this season. But there's legit shut down defenders that just completely don't allow the other, the best player on the other team to score. That's competing. You're just going out and being yeah, this person's not going to score on me today. And then they don't do it. That's legit. You don't have anyone else to blame. And I think that there's, there comes a point in time where you have to be able to allow your son or your daughter to be able to go and legitimately fail, because you're never going to learn without facing the reality of failure. And it's okay to fail. That's how you get better at things. You don't just go out there and find instant success and continue to find instant success all the way to the highest levels. You're going to screw up. You're going to do things. You're going to do stupid stuff. You're going to get yelled at. It's okay. That's how you eventually get to the point where you can do things and compete in a way where, you don't have that fear of failure. I think that's where, sometimes it's that fear of failure, and then we build in excuses as to why we failed. And then it gets reinforced by, hey, the coach doesn't really know what he's doing, and the assistant coaches don't know, and the umpire screwed you. And it's man, maybe you were just 0 for 4 and had a bad day. That happens. It's okay. So it's, to your point, at some point you have to be able to cut the reins and let them go compete and fail on their own, and be okay with that, because you're not going to be there for them 24/7, 365.
Yeah, there's very few people who find success in anything, and baseball's, one of them as well, that they were at the top of the food chain the whole time. The Bryce Harpers, the Alex Rodriguez, the Joe Mauers of the world, that were number one all the way until they, for Rodriguez and Mauer, retired, and Bryce Harper. There's very few guys that are at that level. Most guys' stories have an ebb and flow to it. And you need to be able to deal with some of that failure, and you need to be able to work through when things don't go smooth. And if you have all these built-in excuses, you're not really facing the reality of the situation. And I think that that's abundantly important, to make sure that you're preparing your son or your daughter for the reality of it. And it isn't one conversation. It's consistently reinforcing that the first place that anybody needs to look when something goes wrong is, are you looking at yourself first? Don't be the finger pointer to the outward. Make sure that if you're being critical, be critical of yourself and take a look in the mirror about what you're doing, and just don't have those built-in excuses. And I think it's probably the most important thing to prepare a kid when he gets onto college campus, is instilling some really important character traits, which is probably the top of the food chain. There is just going to be the accountability portion. Are you going to be accountable? Are you going to be humble? Because you're going to get humbled at some point. It's going to be a bad day, and bad days can't turn into bad weeks and can't turn into bad months. And the kids who hold themselves accountable and hold themselves to a standard and understand that they need to compete, and they need to, most importantly, earn what is given to them. And I think that the key word in that sentence is earn. You always have to earn stuff. You're never given anything in this game. And when you get to college, you're never given anything. Like I think in high school, kids get handed stuff because they're just a lot better than other kids. And it's easy at times because going in like, well, I'm the best shortstop. I'm going to play shortstop every day. But when you step on campus, there's 4 other guys who are the best shortstops. So now what are you going to do? Are you going to try to outwork those guys? Are you going to compete? You're going to try to earn the second base spot? Are you going to try to earn the third base spot? Where are you going to fit in? And the kid who's been taught that they need to work hard and they don't have those built-in excuses, they're going to be much more well-equipped to handle the inevitable, which is going to come to them when they get to college. And, you got to earn it. It's really, it's an oversimplification, but I'm not sure if there's any other way to put it. But you have to earn what's going to be given to you when you get to the college level. And I think it starts when you're a young kid. And I think it starts making sure that your parents are sending you that message. I think it's important for any parent that's listening out there, be cognizant of how you speak to your kid when it comes to this kind of stuff. And it doesn't mean you don't support them, and it doesn't mean you don't love on them, and make sure that they're feeling good about themselves. But, there's a tactful way to give them the truth and make sure that they're doing what they need to do and not pointing the finger at everybody else.
Yeah. I'm glad you said it at the end, because that was something that I was going to dive into here, was that we're not, when we talk about a lot of this stuff, we're talking about it through the lens of coaching, right? Like we're attacking this a little bit more from a standpoint of like when we coached and what we've seen this way. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be supportive of your son or daughter. And look, there's a lot of people out there that are not supportive of their son or daughter from an athletic standpoint. And it breaks my heart. Like I've seen it on my teams. I've seen it on other teams. And, it's something that, becoming a dad, it affects me a lot differently than it did before I was a parent. But I think that like, there's a way that you can go about being able to support your son or daughter when it comes to these types of things and these types of conversations, to be able to get the most out of them. Like they're going to fail. And like, that doesn't mean that you just hammer them or, you make the excuses to make them feel better. Like you can have a conversation about what's going on to make sure that we're working through that type of stuff. And I think that, sometimes it might be hard and I don't know, because I'm not this person, but it might be hard to try to work through this with your son or daughter if you've never played a sport. I'm not saying competitively or at a high level. I'm just saying like in general, and if you don't necessarily know, I think, I don't know how you handle that. Like for me and for my wife, who, we both played Division I athletics and we both coached at all 3 levels. Like it's a little bit of a different conversation likely coming when our children are of age and going through this, hopefully. Like, but we've had this conversation, like we're always going to support them in what it is that they want to do. Like we're going to be truthful with what we're saying, but this is what's going to, like, this is how we're going to approach it. So it's not to say that you're not going to be supportive and you don't want them to achieve everything it is that they want to, but at the same time, I think that you need to be able to, one, be relatively realistic, but two, also like be present in what's going on. Like you can't just, and are there situations out there where people are, not developing and not like, yeah, there are, but I would argue that those are a far less prevalent than the just overstated, the coach doesn't like me, they don't develop, they like, because I hear it all the time. And it's like, that can't be true 80% of the time, right? Like I'm sure there's some truth to it somewhere, but being able to work through those things and figure out a way to be able to find success and do it that way, I think is a little bit better from a parent standpoint.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good segue to.
Well, hold on, and I will say this, and I'm sorry, it just dawned on me because I sent this tweet to you and Eric before, and Tom House tweeted out a thing today that was essentially like, if you're worried about politics and whatever, like be so good that they can't ignore you. Essentially, it was something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing the tweet, but it was essentially like, if you're worried about this type of stuff, be so good that they can't deny the fact that you need to be on the field and in the lineup. And there's so much truth in that. And that's something that I would say to my guys all the time, and, shout out to the RPI engineers of 2024 hosting the tournament this weekend. And I don't know when this is coming out, but, they finished first the hosting tournament. I'm super happy for them and the new staff. But, we would talk about it all the time. Like, if you want to get on the field, like, be better than everyone else. Your job is to make my job hard, right? Like, when I'm writing a lineup, I want to have honestly, if I have 15 position guys, I want 15 options to be able to throw out there and be like, damn, this is going to be a tough lineup to write. If I have 20 options, like 20 guys, give me 20 options. I don't want to look at it and be like, these are my 9 guys and that's it, right? Like, your job is to make my job super difficult. And on the other side, it's to say like, okay, I have 15 guys that I can confidently put in this lineup and move things around to play better defensively in the back half of games and still not lose anything off. Like, there's a lot of things that go into that, and your job is to be able to do that. And, I think especially for younger kids and for parents who are listening to this, like, your job is to get your kid to the point where when he steps on a college campus, he wants to make coach's job as difficult as it can possibly be, in a good way, not difficult in a bad way, but difficult in a way of like, I can't not have him on the field, or I have to find a way to get him more burn because he's going to help us a lot in the future. He's a tad bit short right now hitting, but I need to find a way to get him into the game defensively late so he gets comfortable being in that role so he can grow as a player. But that would be probably one of the best things I could say. And I saw that tweet right before we went to record, and I sent it to you and Eric, but I thought that was there's so much truth in that like, if you're worried about that stuff, be so good that they can't deny it, and they got to play you.
Yeah. Here's a direct quote: be so undeniably good that you're no longer in the margin of error for coach/team politics. The only way to force your way onto the field is to be undeniably better.
There's so much truth to that at every level. I'm taking out 9U and all of that nonsense. But from a high school standpoint and a college standpoint, and I'm sure if you ask pro guys the same thing, because it's a business, like, be so good that they can't deny the fact that you need to be on the field, and they have to keep you in the organization if you're in pro ball or like that. Like, there's so much truth in that, but behind that is everything you're doing leading up to that. It's the support system that you have from your parents, and not being told that everything is everyone else's fault. Like, just go work super hard and be better than everyone else. And it sounds super simple to do, but it's so hard, and I think that's one of those things, like, when you talk about some of the people that are really, really good at this game, like, it's boring. Like, it's boring what they do, but they do everything so well that they just are better than everybody else. Like, Scotty Scheffler is boring, but good Lord, is he good at golf. And he's not even close to Tiger Woods.
Yeah, which is...
I digress.
No, but the undeniable piece, I think, I want to unpack this for a second, because I think this actually takes us into the role of the parent and kind of speaking to the recruiting process side of it. But what people don't see is the non-game day stuff. And that's where undeniable comes in, is that you rarely have mediocre practice players who are good on game day. Are there guys? I'm sure people can find outliers, just like when they talk about dudes who didn't throw hard, who were really good at pitching, they all go to Greg Maddux, right? They all go to that one, like, extreme outlier. Like, yes, there are guys who are probably horseshit practice players who were just so talented and had the ability to turn it on. But those guys are the outliers. Most guys are really good at their preparation, and they're really good at taking care of their bodies, and they're really good at practicing every day, and they're really good teammates, and they do all the things that are required of them so that they can be successful on game day. And that's where it starts. And the reason I think that this segues into the role of the parent piece and kind of back to the recruiting process itself is that these are most of the things that people lose sight of because they're so concerned with getting recruited, that you need to be really good at the other stuff first, because to get to the undeniable phase from a recruiting perspective, and that's the goal is to be good enough where there's nobody out there saying that you can't play at a certain level, right? Whether it's you're playing it in the ACC or whether you're playing in a Division III conference, like, you need to get to a point where there's somebody who can't poke holes in what you do and they think you're good enough. And in order to do that, you need to check a lot of those boxes that don't happen on game day. The energy, the commitment, the teammate stuff. How hard are you working in the weight room? How hard are you working at your craft? Are you a good person? How do you treat your parents? Like, that's the kind of stuff you need to be concerned with those boxes and worry about the long term, and don't be in such a rush to get recruited. Be in a rush to be recruitable. And I know we've said that before, but I think a lot of parents and a lot of players get the cart before the proverbial horse, where we're trying to get recruited and you need to be recruitable first. And everybody's timeline is going to be different. And the kids who put their head down and continue to work and are focused on their long-term development, those are the kids that usually end up finding a good home where they're going, because they're not so concerned about the recruiting thing, that they're more concerned about being a good player. And from a parent perspective, one of the roles of the parent is to support your kid and make sure that they're doing the things that they need to do in order to get where they want to go. Like, some of the best parents that we've worked with aren't asking questions of where does he fit? You know, is he a Division I player? Is he going to get a scholarship? What coaches are interested in him? The parents who I've had the most success with, and you've had the most success with, and are the most enjoyable to work with, ask us the questions of, what do we need to do for him to make sure that we're stacking the chips in his favor? Do you know anybody who's a really good strength guy that we can get in touch with, because we want to make sure that we're giving him what he needs? Do you know anybody who's a really good pitching coach that we can get in touch with this offseason, because we want to make sure that he has what he needs in order to continue to get better? And they're not worried about the flashy bumper sticker, and they're worried about, how can you help us prepare for college and how can you help us get there? Not so much about who can you call, because when the time is right, we can call whoever, and whoever's supporting you can help you with that. But you need to get to the recruitable state first. And for parents, don't live vicariously through your kids during this process. Be there to support them and do everything you can to help stack the chips in your favor. And don't worry so much about the flashy stuff. Like, I think that would probably might not be the number one thing, but I think it's an important talking point when you're talking about the role of the parent, is do everything that you can within your financial means to provide your kids with a support system that's going to help them get through this process, with a focus on their long-term development, not the short-term gratification of being able to put up a Twitter post about where they went to school or where they're going to go to school.
Agreed. You know, I think the big one that I'd like to pull the thread on a little bit more is the behind the scenes practice and off the field stuff, which is, you know, obviously something that is not seen by anybody but really the team and the coaching staff, you know, and your strength coaches and the trainers and those things. And I think that those are some of the most important times for coaches to be able to really figure out, you know, who's who can do what, and who is developing at the rate in which you need them to develop. And I think sometimes, you know, one of the hardest and biggest adjustments for younger players to make is that jump into just practicing at the college level. Because you're going to get dinged up and you're going to be sore and hurt and things of that nature. And being able to, you know, to your point, like, can you show up and practice? Do you have the energy every day? Like, there are very rarely at the college level, again, guys that just do not practice well that are going to show up in the game on game day and be really good. Are some of them out there? Sure, there are. But by and large, yeah, like, guys who play really well are guys who practice hard and practice well. You know, and I think that there's a lot of other intangibles that get parsed out through that. And there's, you know, your work ethic, your energy level, your toughness level, you know, how much can you handle physically? You know, things like that. And you can figure a lot of the stuff that like that out in practice and in inter squads. And, you know, there's always going to be one or two pitchers who, when they get lashed, their arms hurt. And they're in the training room quite a bit. And, you know, I'm not ever going to shy away from saying, like, I'm not going to ever say, like, you shouldn't be in the training room if you're legitimately hurt. But every time you throw really well, you don't need to go. And every time you don't throw well, you're in there. Like, that's another one of those built-in excuses of like, it's just my arm. My arm hurts, and that's why I wasn't good. Like, no, you weren't good because you were throwing the same exact velocity as normal, but your ball wasn't moving, so it was flattened out and you just got barreled. Instead of trying to figure out a way to not do that, we instantly go to something else. And I think that those are things that, we see in practice that the kids see, the players see, but mom and dad don't see, and parents don't see, and everyone else. So then it becomes, well, why is he throwing in high leverage situations? He's good. Because I can't trust him. I don't know what guy I'm going to get. If you can't do it in practice, and this is a conversation I had multiple times with guys, if you can't do it in practice, I can't put you in the game, because when there's no pressure, you can't do it. What makes you think that you're going to do it when there's a lot of pressure? I need to see you do it in a lot of situations where the pressure really isn't there, right? There's pressure because it's practice, but it's practice. And the double-edged sword is I want you to screw up so we can fix it. But when it's just a routine two-hopper right at you and we sail it out of the yard, I can't put you out there. I need that play made to end the game, babe. I can't have a guy standing on second base up 1 in the 9th. We gotta get that out. And I think that those are things that a lot of those things get lost in these conversations with mom and dad, and especially at the youth level, because it's you don't necessarily see a lot of that stuff. And when you get to college, you practice a lot more and you do a lot of this stuff. You can figure a lot of that stuff out as you go. But you're right. There's a lot more that goes into these types of things, and I think that for us in having this conversation, doing it, on the podcast like this, is these are things that you probably don't think about a whole hell of a lot as parents when you're thinking about guiding your son or daughter through this process, whatever sport it is. There's a lot more than just the game that matters. And I've said it before. How many times have a kid come into your office be I just need more opportunities in game to show you what I can do? You've had 50 at-bats preseason to show me what you can do, and you have 2 hits, and you punch out a lot. Those are all opportunities to do it. Again, I need to see you do it in practice before I can see you do it in a game. And those are things you're not going to tell mom and dad that you're 2 for 50 in the preseason and be no, I'm working hard. And that might be true. But the other guy has 25 hits. That guy's going to play. It's just what it is. And a lot of you don't see the behind the scenes stuff that goes into this. And I think that that's where it can get jammed up a little bit of I don't understand why he's not getting more. But again, you have those opportunities every day, and you need to capitalize on those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the prerequisite to get recruited, and this is something that we talk about with players, and it's something I don't think can be understated, is you need to be a good high school player first. Let's be a good high school player, and then we can worry about what the whole college thing looks like. I think, it kind of goes back to what I was saying, is don't rush to get recruited. Be in a rush to be good, and be in a rush to continue to develop. The other piece of advice that I would give parents in terms of the recruiting process is go into this with an open mind. And what I mean by that is don't assume that you know more than you do. Because I think this is where it gets a little bit dangerous with parents at times, is that they make assumptions or make judgments on what they deem to be true. And they may not be informed enough to understand how the process works or what the evaluation process looks like. And I hear it a lot with, well, my kid's got a better batting average than that kid, and he's going to that school. Why can't he play there? And that's a fundamental mistake that people make, is that they draw these conclusions, and it's like confirmation bias. I'm going to grab some information that supports my argument, but I'm not looking at the whole thing objectively. And I don't understand the system. I don't understand the level of play well enough to really understand that how the evaluation process works. And I think that the parents who are really successful in this with their kids is that they don't tell the baseball world what they think should be the truth. they let the baseball world tell them what the truth is. Because ultimately it'll come out in the wash at some point. Do you need an advocate? Do you need people who have good information? Yes, absolutely. But ultimately the baseball world tells you what the truth is, right? If you're 2025 and it's August and no Division I schools are calling you, and you're just mad at all the coaches because you think they're all wrong, or you're a parent who can't understand why your kid's not getting Division I offers, well, there's probably a reason for that. And people get hung up on that stuff and they want to find things that help confirm what they believe to be true. And this process, it can be cruel sometimes, right? It may tell you something that you don't like, and you may not get to where you think you belong for various reasons. Maybe somebody thinks you're too slow, or you don't have enough bat speed, or you're not a good enough defender, whatever it might be. But those are things that are out of your control. And as a parent, once again, it's a trickle down effect, that if you're constantly telling your kid, well, these guys don't know what they're looking at, and you close yourself off to these other opportunities, those opportunities will dry up. And I think that that's a fundamental mistake. And I think it's important for a parent to be objective about what they're seeing. And once again, it doesn't mean you don't support your kid. It doesn't mean that you don't want them to strive for the absolute best that they can do. But you have to be objective. You have to go into this process assuming that you don't know anything. Because I think some of the parents that get in trouble with this are the ones that either know enough to be dangerous, or they know enough, but they don't know enough to know that they're wrong. And it can really cloud a kid's process. And a lot of times it's the parents that get in the way of a process going really, really well, not the player. So the objectivity that you go into this with, I think, is very, very important from a pure evaluation and process perspective. Is you got to be open to different levels. You got to be open to different types of fits. And you have to be willing to listen to what the baseball world is telling you. And it may not be what you think is correct, and it may not be what you want to hear, but at some point you have to face the truth of what the situation is. And that can be really hard. But if you go into this process with an open mind, and you go into this willing to take information from people who are good at their jobs, who can help you through this process, it'll be a lot smoother. It'll be a lot less stressful, and you have a lot less resentment towards the process.
I think you said it two different ways, and both of them are correct. One, it's cruel. This is, you're going to find out if you want to play college baseball and you go through the recruiting process, you will find out where you fit in, because there's 295 Division I schools in the country. And if not one of them is calling you, you're likely not a Division I baseball player right then and there. Doesn't mean that you might not be in a couple months if they're not calling on August 1st of this year. Might be one next year. And that, to your point earlier, put your head down and work. But the other is this is a humbling game. Everyone has talked about this in this game for as long as it has been played. It is a humbling game. You are going to get humbled when you play this game, and you have to be humble in this process as well. And the numbers we throw them around all the time, but from an NCAA standpoint, there's NAI and JUCO balls. So but the NCAA is, about 7% of high school seniors are going to go play college baseball Division I, II, or III. That's 93% of people in your graduating class that are not going to play college baseball. You have to be really good to be able to go play at any level. And when you don't, to your point of, people are dangerous enough to they know enough to be dangerous, excuse me. But you don't, you know enough to be dangerous because you kind of have an idea of what's going on, but you don't understand the intricacies that go into every level and every institution and program. And, that kid might be going to that school because he has, he can do a couple things that are better than what your son might be able to do, and I think sometimes people try to go apples to apples on stuff. And if you can really hit, but you can't defend, you have to be a really, really, really good hitter for Division I guys to really want to offer you a spot, because you can only do one thing. If you can do multiple things, that opens up more doors. and there's a lot more that goes into it in the recruiting process. And, to try to figure it out, and Jonathan talked about it with the Ivy League. If you're trying to figure out the AI, like you're barking up the wrong tree. And it's the same thing kind of with the recruiting process. Like if you're trying to figure out what every single program is looking for and what every single program is doing and why they're not recruiting, like you're worrying about the wrong stuff. You need to worry about what you need to do in order to be recruited for yourself. If you're worried about everyone else and where they're going, what they're doing, and I saw this on Twitter and Instagram, like you're not actually worried about what it is that you need to do to be recruitable to get recruited, because you're worried about things that are completely out of your control. What you can control is go put your head down, work really hard, and be recruitable. Because if you're worried about everyone else, it's taking away from what it is that you're capable of doing. And if you're going out trying to prove everyone wrong because I think I'm better, like you generally end up trying to play above your ability level, which then you're trying to do too much, which then usually comes back to bite you because you're going to do things that you're not capable of doing, which are then going to show up from a recruiting standpoint as not being good enough because you're trying to prove a point and you're playing above what you're capable of doing right now. And that's, the other part of it is the projectability. And projectability is, there's no exact science on projectability.
Good luck nailing that.
Right?
You go watch a kid, and I think the good example here is pitchers, because it's the most quantifiable one, is that, I've had these conversations. Well, I throw 88, he throws 88. Why is he going there and I can't? Well, you want to sit down and talk for like 30 minutes? Because there's coaches have preferences. They like certain pitch shapes. They like how guys move, your frame. Like there's all different stuff that factors into this, that every coach is different. And you could have 10 coaches show up to watch the same kid, and you're going to come away with likely 10 slightly different reactions to who that kid is. And that probably sums up the recruiting process. You might have 10 guys who all like that guy, but one guy's going to think he doesn't profile as a starter. One guy's going to think that he's got a chance to be a starter. Another guy's going to want to change his arm angle, or they're going to look at some mechanical tweak, or one guy's going to look at him and say, well, I think he's going to throw really hard someday. And another guy's going to say, well, I think he's pretty much capped out because of this or whatever. Like you're going to get 10 different things. And that's the nuance of this process that is really hard for people to nail down. I mean, right. You have sat next to each other and watched the same kid, and we've both come away with slightly different, like, hey man, I think that kid can stick it short. And you're like, man, I don't think so. Like, I think he's a second baseman. And like, that sums up the recruiting process, is that every coach is looking for different things and they value different things, which is another thing that's hard to nail down, that certain coaches value different traits more than they do other ones because it's something that they've had success either developing, or it's something that their program is built on, whether it's strike throwing or speed or defense. Like, some guys are going to value a glove more over a bat. And in certain cases, like, it's really hard to nail that stuff down. And if you're a parent and you're trying to sift through this without any of that experience or knowledge based on experience, you're spinning your wheels and you're never going to come up with an answer that's satisfactory.
No, because there's no... It's such an inexact science. Like, and even, I always used to kind of use this example, like, us and myself and Coach Reyna at University of Rochester, like, we went head to head on a lot of guys. And I would probably say at the end, it was a 50-50 split of guys that chose to go to U of R over RPI and vice versa. But like, there were some guys that, he liked more than I did, and they ended up at U of R, and, I was wrong. Like, they were really good. And there were guys that we ended up at RPI that he didn't really like, and they ended up really good. And, it's just like, my point is, like, within the same conference with a similar profiled school with programs that had had a lot of success, like, even though we're recruiting kind of the same players, like, there were certain things that I valued heavier than he did, and it worked for both of us because it worked within our programs. So, like, yeah, I liked them and I recruited them, but it was like, I don't necessarily like this guy, head to head. I have this guy, I like this guy more. We offered him, he took and it doesn't mean that I'm not going to offer that kid eventually, but this is the kid I like. If he decides that he wants to come to RPI, then I have to call that kid and say, hey man, we don't have a spot for you, a guaranteed roster spot. If you wanted to walk on, I think you have a legit shot of making this team, but I want you to know, we recruited this guy ahead of you. And then, same thing, that conversation has happened other ways at other programs with kids. And, so it's such an inexact science to sit there and try to figure it out. You're never going to be able to figure it out. And what certain programs value and what coaches value, you could sit 9 pitching coaches down in a room. You're likely going to get 9 different answers as to what they truly, really want out of certain players. Now, generally speaking, are they all going to be the same? They want guys who throw strikes and get outs and do do something, have a breaking ball, a secondary pitch. But when they go out and recruit, they're looking at certain things and certain things that they that they their strengths of what they're coaching into guys and what they think that kid might be able to do. And if they don't think, and Chris talked about this and some other guys, it could also be a character thing. Not to say that it's a negative, but if they don't feel as though they're going to mesh well with this kid or be able to coach them up to what they think this kid is capable of, they're going to go with a different guy that might be the same profiled kid, but might be might be a little bit tougher, or might be able to handle criticism a little bit more, or is better in the communication process because they value communication. And this kid has been on top of everything the whole time, while the other kid takes 5 days to respond to a text message or a phone call. Those things, you work through too. And it's not to say that it's a red flag on the character standpoint. It's just when you get older and you realize this stuff as a coach, hey, I might not, this might not fit with me. And we're going to spend a lot of time together. I want to be able to get the most out of the kid. I don't think it's going to work with him. And that's again, to the point earlier of it being cruel, this is cruel because you're going to be told no. And that's sometimes hard to swallow. And, so a lot of times, it's not necessarily, it's usually hey, we went with another guy that we think fits our program better. And sometimes that's hard to hear. But it doesn't mean that you're not a good player or not a good kid. It just means they fit into that program specifically better than they thought you did. That's okay. You're going to find the right fit somewhere else where likely they're going to commit you and they're going to have to call and tell some other kid that they have committed you over another kid. So it's going to happen on the flip side of it. But I think, from a recruiting standpoint as a parent, one, you have to prepare your kid for that, but also you can't get super discouraged in trying to figure all this out because one, you're not going to, and two, you're going to hear no a decent amount, but you're also going to say no more times than you're going to say yes. So you're going to be calling coaches, you're going to be getting recruited. You're going to call coaches when you decide to commit and say hey, thanks for, I appreciate all the, everything, but I'm going to X school. And, you're going to have those conversations too. So it does go both ways. You're going to tell coaches no just as much as, coaches are going to tell you no. And being able to prep your son or daughter for that is invaluable in this process because it sets them up to be able to have these conversations when they get to college about what it is that they need to do in order to find success on the field.
You're trying to find one place. Don't get caught up on the nose. Right, to your point, it's super competitive out there, and coaches. If you're trying to get into the head of all the coaches that are trying to recruit you, it's just a lost cause. You're not going to be able to figure it out, and focus on the long term, which is trying to find the right fit. The other tip that I would have for parents is don't do this for your kid, and what I mean by that is they have to want this. And you can't want it more than your kid. If getting recruited and playing college baseball matters more to you than it does to your son or daughter, that's a problem. Your son or daughter has to be able to take ownership of this. You can't be the one sending emails. You can't be the one doing the research on schools. You can't be the one communicating with coaches via Twitter. Like your son or your daughter has to take ownership of this. And it is absolutely paramount that they do that. There's lessons to be learned in taking accountability and taking ownership of the process. But fundamentally, if your kid isn't willing to do the work that's required for them to get recruited and to play at the next level, and you're the one who is driving the ship, the end result isn't going to be desirable. And that's an important conversation. And it's something that we have with everybody that we work with is like, is this for the kid or is this for the parents? And if the kid isn't the one who's saying, I want to play college baseball, tell me what I need to do. Tell me what I need to do to get better. Tell me what I need to do in order to stack the chips in my favor. Like, if that's not happening, then we're in trouble, because mom and dad cannot be the fuel behind this. They have to be there for support. They have to be there to guide. They have to be there to keep things on track, but they fundamentally cannot be the ones who want this to happen, because if the kid's heart's not in it and they're not willing to do the work, it's going to be a really tough go when they get to college. And for a lot of the same reasons that we talked about earlier. And I think that that's a huge thing for parents to understand as they go into this process with their kids is the kid has to want it, period.
Yeah. I mean, there's no real rebuttal to that whatsoever. And I think that there's, when you can tell that it's being driven by mom and dad, it's a red flag, for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about already. And if you've listened to us for long enough, or this is your first time, like, there's so much that goes into a college baseball season, and a career that if you don't necessarily want it on the front end that bad, like, it's going to get super tough for you when you get there. So it needs to be driven by the kid and the athlete who ultimately wants to be able to go play in college, because you can get burnt out quick and not necessarily really want to do it. And I do think that, coaches will shy away from a lot of those recruitable student athletes who are really being driven by mom and dad, because you really start to question, like, how much do they want it? And if they don't want it as bad as I think they do, like, do I want them in my program? And those are realities at the college level when you're going through the recruiting process. And you might think that you're doing your son a favor in doing this stuff. And, it was always a red flag for me when you'd get emails from mom and dad of like, Jason is, really, he's just so busy with lessons and school and baseball. It's like, well, it's not going to get a lot easier when he gets here. Like, if he doesn't have time to write an email, like, what's going to happen when he comes to school and he has tests and classes and weightlifting and practice and a social life that he's trying to manage? And can he eat and do laundry? Like, all these things that are going to happen, like, you start to question, like, is this going to be worth my time? Because I'm likely going to have to hold his hand for at least a year. And, the less hand holding you have to do with that stuff from a coaching standpoint, the better your program and your team can be, because you're not worried about all the other stuff that you shouldn't necessarily have to worry about. And again, I had Coach Rossi, one of Coach Rossi's famous lines, like, there's enough players in this country that I can find that are, driven, who want this themselves, and, they can do it themselves. And I think that that's true of a lot of things. And I think it's true, especially at, it's true at the Division I level. And I think it's true at the academic Division III level, because you're recruiting nationally. You can find enough kids in this country who are driven enough that they want this bad enough that they're going to do what it is that they need to do in order to be able to be recruited. And there's a distinct difference between, I'd rather have, it's that proverbial, like, I'd rather have 9 of these guys. We'd win a lot of games. Like, I'd rather recruit a whole slew of guys that really want to be at the program I'm coaching at. And I hear from them and they communicate and we do all this stuff, versus, well, I just hear from mom and dad all the time. I haven't really talked to the kid, because again, I've said it before, like, I'm not writing mom and dad's name into the lineup. Like, I'm writing the kids. So I need to have a relationship and a rapport with the kid to make sure that he's going to fit into our program on a daily basis and be able to do the things it is that I'm asking of him and what our standard is within our program. If I don't feel comfortable with that, I'm going to go in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this kind of gets to some of the visit related stuff. And so the coach communication stuff is that the kid's got to be at the forefront of it. To your point, like when you have a kid on campus, mom and dad shouldn't be asking the baseball questions. They should be concerned about academic and finances, questions around college life, questions around how that works. But when it comes to the baseball stuff, like dad shouldn't be the one asking about, well, what's your development plan for my son? Like the kid should be asking, how are you going to make me better? Like, what do you guys do from a pitching perspective that is going to put me in a position where I can continue to develop? Like, where do you see me fitting in with the program? You know, what type of player do you think I am? Like, those are questions that should come from the kid. And when it comes from mom and dad, it leads coaches to believe that it's more important for the player. And if you're a kid who's shy, like I get it, it's not always easy to have those conversations, but these are the moments that you got to maybe do a little bit of planning, maybe write some stuff down, maybe rehearse it a little bit. But you got to be the ones who are leading that conversation, and you got to be prepared when you're going through this process for the kid to lead the way, right? Mom and dad are in the background. They should be guiding. They should be the voice of reason when it comes to stuff. They should have those conversations after a visit. They should sit down and talk about the different types of schools. Absolutely. You should 100% be a massive part of this process. But the kid's got to be the star of the show. The kid's the one who's got to lead. They have to put in the work. And as a parent, if you step in and you take those responsibilities away from them, you're doing them a disservice, because eventually it's going to catch up to them, because they're going to have to take accountability at some point. And, you know, as a parent, I think that that's an important thing to consider as you go through this process with your son or daughter.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before, the we versus me and things of that nature. And this is kind of a longer episode, obviously, on all that stuff. But, you know, there's a distinct difference between being able to, especially on visits, like discern who's leading what. You know, and there's a big difference between, like, you know, the kid having a prepared amount of questions and such, and then you're like, hey, you know, you forgot one or two, and mom and dad ask them, like, that's completely fine, right? Like you might get a little flustered or off track because you're talking about a lot of other stuff. You know, and I think the flip side to it is when all of the questions are coming from mom and dad, it's like, does this kid really want to come to this school? Is he really vested in this process? And, you know, it's absolutely, mom and dad ask the financial and the support questions, like the academic support and the mental health support or the medical support, anything it is that comes with all of, you know, what you're worried about from your son's health and well-being, you know, and obviously the financial end of things. But when all of the baseball stuff is driven by mom and dad, along with everything else, you start to really wonder how vested in the process is this young man.
I think we hit quite a bit. Anything else you want to add before we close this one out? I think we covered quite a bit of ground on some stuff for parents to think about.
I mean, I just think that it's if we could drive home the point of, like, being supportive and, you know, being realistic, you know, those are the things that will really get your son recruited or your daughter recruited and help them tremendously when they get to school. You know, I think sometimes when, you know, there's a lot of built-in excuses and it's everyone else's fault and we're driving the boat and, you know, we do this and this, that, and the other thing, like you're likely going to be setting your child up for failure when they get to school. And I'm not a professional parent by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, from a coaching standpoint, these are a lot of things that we've seen over the course of our careers where, like, those kids generally are the ones that struggle. And look, like I would be lying to our audience if I didn't say that there's kids that have ended up in our program where, mom and dad did drive the boat and you kind of look the other way on some things, and then they get to campus and it doesn't work. And you decide that you're not going to recruit kids like that ever again. And I'd be lying if I told you that it didn't happen to me. And that's why I can sit here on the other side of this business doing this stuff and tell you, like, I didn't recruit kids after a certain year when we got recruited, or more or less like it was flipped, like they recruited us and it was mom and dad a lot. Like, we didn't do it. And we tried, it didn't work. It was a massive failure. So I stopped doing that. And it's the truth and the reality in this business that, like, there are a lot of red flags when it comes to that stuff. And what you want to be able to do is not necessarily present all of them. You want to be able to help guide your son or daughter through the process and be there as a support and help them through. And, I'm talk with them after visits, talk with them before visits, talk about phone calls, all of that stuff. Like, hey man, if you want to be on the phone call with coach, like, that's fine too. Like, your son might, like, if they are shy, like maybe you might have a couple questions that, he might forget, like, and that's fine. Like, there's a difference to that than like the straight up mom and dad are controlling this entire process. And then, like, that's where we're going to get into the weeds, and it can it'll muddy the waters a little bit. And you're likely going to find yourself being hard to recruit.
Yeah. I think the last thing I'll say, obviously we've driven home the objective piece. We've driven home letting the kids lead, obviously being incredibly supportive of what they're doing and do the best you can to put them in a position to be successful. Focus on the long term, focus on the fit. But the other thing, and I don't know if we need to go into too much depth on this, but I feel like we have to say it, is be cognizant of how you act when you don't think anybody's looking. And this is something that we've talked about from a player perspective, but I also think it's important from a parent perspective, is that if you're chirping umpires or you're yelling at kids or you're boisterous in the stands, like, there's a big difference between being supportive of your kid and being an ass. And you got to make sure that you're not teetering towards the latter there, because coaches pick up on that stuff. And coaches pick up how you interact with your kid and how your kid interacts with you. So just be thoughtful about how you observe your kid. Be a parent, not a fan. Be thoughtful about what you're saying, who you're saying it to, because you'd be shocked at how many times there's a coach at a game and you don't know that he's even there. And it's not hard to figure out who's a parent of what kid. And if I'm there to watch your son, and you're doing something that's really off-putting, you're not helping your kid. So being cognizant of that, I think, is important too, because nobody wants to deal with parents who are a pain in the ass. And don't give a coach a reason to cross your kid off a list because of something that you did. Maybe that's what I'm really driving at, is like, understand that your actions have consequences for your kid at a certain point. And the last thing, this is difficult enough as it is, this whole process. You hit at the percentages earlier, like, it's a small percentage of kids who get to play college athletics, college baseball in particular is what we're talking about, but don't do anything that would put your kid's opportunity at jeopardy. And how you communicate with coaches, how you communicate with your kids, that's stuff the coaches ultimately pick up on. And they want parents who are supportive, and they want parents who hold their kids accountable. So if you're doing those two things, fantastic. But if you're the parent who's screaming at umpires at a game, like, you probably need to look into the mirror and realize that, like, that behavior might come back to bite you in the ass. And it's not even going to be your ass. It's going to be your kid's ass. So just be thoughtful about that. But I mean, I think overall is put your kids in a situation to be successful. Be objective about this process. Don't going in with any preconceived notions of what you know and what you don't know. It's a very nuanced process. It is not straightforward. and do everything you can to put your kids in an advantageous position and do it from a supportive perspective. And I think you can have a ton of success in this. And, hopefully there were some takeaways there. I know there might've been some hard truths that we chucked out there, but like we said, we try to be as authentic as we can about this and speak from a place of experience in order to try to educate families that are going through this process, whether it's baseball, basketball, lacrosse, whatever it is. A lot of this stuff applies directly to the recruiting process across all sports, not just baseball. So hopefully you guys learned something. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen this week, and we'll be back next week with some more talk about baseball and college recruiting. Anything else you want to add, Coach?
Nope, nailed it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.